So Hawthorn have done it. The first team in the 18-team competition to go back to back to back. They're three-peaters. They are remarkable.
En route to their 4 consecutive grand final appearances in the 2010s, Hawthorn had to overcome a plethora of preliminary final roadblocks. In 2012, they hosted a thriller against a firing Adelaide outfit at the G, with some Silrioli magic scraping them over the line in a 5-point win. In 2013, they had to free themselves from the Kennett curse against Geelong. A spirited final quarter fight back from the Hawks secured a famous triumph in one of the defining clashes of a storied modern rivalry. And in 2015, they knocked off Fremantle in Perth, footy's hardest road trip. But despite that, amidst all their challenges they faced in their penultimate fixtures, none were quite as unique as the nail-biting final 10 minutes of the 2014 preliminary final against Port Adelaide. In many ways, Port had an opportunity to change the AFL landscape that night. But before we reflect on one of the most exciting finishes of the modern era, it's important to know how this power team, 2 years removed from a 14th place finish, even made it to a preliminary final. And it's a journey that began on the most humiliating day in the club's history, September 29, 2007. Kane Cornes said in a 2016 appearance on AFL 360 that game set the club back 5 or 6 years, if that's any indication of the repercussions from a record 119-point grand final thumping. Although it may not have influenced the progression of youngsters such as Justin Westhoff or Travis Boak, who had no standing to sway the contest, it did hamper the legacy of their experienced core. Sean Burgoyne may have made amends at Hawthorn, but the collective firm of Warren Tredrea, Brett Ebert and Chad Cornes were never truly able to shake off the lingering burden of the loss. An era defined by regular season dominance and a maiden national premiership died for the Power that day. They dropped to 13th in 08 and would continue their downward descent into the 2011 season, where the franchise stooped to a new low. They became the first team to lose to the expansion Gold Coast Suns on home soil and would finish the year in a measly 16th spot. After the 2012 season offered slight improvement, coach Matthew Primus was relieved of his coaching duties, and as if the club had endured enough, it was in their off-season Las Vegas footy trip where the true tragedy would strike.
First tonight, the tragic death of young Port Adelaide AFL player John McCarthy.
John McCarthy's death shocked the footy world, and more so sent an already struggling organisation into a dire predicament. In the same week where the club lost stalwarts Daniel Pearce and Troy Chaplin through free agency, Port announced former Geelong player Ken Hinkley as their new coach. Hinkley was an assistant coach for the Cats in their reign of dominance in the late 2000s and was serving as an assistant for Gold Coast when Port executive Keith Thomas came calling. Apparently, every offer had been rejected until a text from Geelong's Andrew Mackey convinced Thomas that Hinkley had changed his mind, willing to jump at the Power in spite of their unfortunate position. Although some old campaigners had been lost in the playing group leading into the 2013 season, there was still a solid young core to work around with star Robbie Gray, sophomore Chad Wingard and their first round draft pick Ollie Wines. Accommodated by Boak, Westhoff, Angus Monfries and Jay Schultz all hitting their peak, this upstart team was primed to return to the finals under the hard-on-the-sleeve leadership of Hinkley. But we just didn't see it coming. In 2006, the West Coast Eagles coined themselves Comeback Kings for their regular season come-from-behind wins against Carlton and Geelong, and if that warranted the nickname, Port Adelaide would have given it a fair run for its money in 2013. In round 5, they overran the Eagles after trailing by 41 points in the third quarter, and in round 13 they slogged their way to victory against a solid Sydney outfit after trailing by 3 goals in a low-scoring affair. But if there was truly a moment to pinpoint the "this team is legit" realisation, it came during the round 14 home game against Collingwood at Amy Stadium.
The heat's on in the kitchen. Oh, look at this. Play it simple. Good attack from Patrick Carlisle. He left his man. He took them on. He gets to Wines. Oh, baby!
Port cruised to a flogging on that night and sent out a warning to the rest of the competition. This comeback story had substance. It would be impossible to talk about Port's 2013 campaign without at least mentioning the classic round 19 showdown against Adelaide. This is where the fixture peaked. The Chad Wingard game, or the Angus Monfries off-spin game, whatever you want to call it. What an insane finish. Wingard's 5-goal performance is still his career highlight to date. It was only fitting that he had the final say with the match-winning goal. And as Tim Watson stated,
they won't keep him out of the All-Australian team.
Port travelled to Melbourne to take on Collingwood in week 1 of the finals. In spite of their regular season heroics, they were once again billed as the underdog, facing the competition's most experienced side away from home with little knockout game credential amongst their younger members. Once again, the Power had to leave it late, with 2 Ollie Wines goals turning the tide.
Go forward before Point. Wines. He's kicked the goal. This time he's got it. There's the answer.
Collingwood were rattled.
Footy Port in the last 8 to 10 minutes of the game. Pendlebury's kicked it out of bounds on the full.
And the resurgence of a former laughingstock had been established with a finals victory. Although they bowed out the next week in a tight clash with Geelong, this rejuvenated Port team hadn't lost any admirers. In abidance with their reputation, they refused to lie down in the final term. A late miracle goal by Justin Westhoff providing a spark and rallying to within 10 points before Stephen Motlop shut the gate on the Power's season.
To the pocket, Westhoff!
Although they couldn't scrape into the Final Four, the seeds had been planted for another September run in 2014. Now you can sit here and praise this team all you want, but President David Koch and the club's media team deserve most of the credit for forging the identity of this short-lived Port Adelaide run. In 2014, the club became self-aware regarding their rise from relative obscurity, so they milked the hell out of it.
It's a place where our community spirit and unrelenting pursuit of success will always live on.
A lot of the inner sanctum stuff that comes out of clubs these days are a direct result of Port Adelaide's access provided to Ken Hinkley's pre-match speeches, candid moments on the training track and matchday insights that we hadn't seen before. If anything, it made the team more relatable in a way that we liked. We were taken along for the ride in their rise to contention, and it made for engrossing viewing. But amidst all the off-field contributors, the true stroke of genius lied in the choice to play the masterwork that is INXS's Never Tear Us Apart, right before the first bounce at home games. Everything about it was so perfect. It came around a defining time for the newly refurbished Adelaide Oval, dubbed the Portress during that season. It encapsulated the fighting spirit of that team and solidified the club as an innovator in the modern game. On elimination final day in 2014, Richmond were beaten by the time the ball had even been bounced. The prison bar Guernseys were on, the scarves in the crowd were overwhelming, and it just felt like the planets were aligning for the Port Adelaide Footy Club. If ever there was a time where a 5th place side looked unstoppable, this was it. People tend to forget just how viscerally fun this team was to watch. Ken Hinkley utilised Hamish Hartlett's right leg as a weapon, Jake Neade and Matt White looked dangerous every time the ball was in their hands, Wingard was doing Wingard things and Tom Jonas caused many a squib contest from his opposition. You could see hints of the late 2000s Cats in their style of play courtesy of Hinkley, yet they were younger. Even in the purple patch the question was how good will they be, as opposed to how good are they. And considering they didn't lose a single game by over 5 goals for the whole year, they were pretty solid.
Under the pump, chose the right option, well making something out of nothing. Westhoff centred forward, now they'll get a goal. Well done Hartlett, Westhoff, Gray, and into an open goal, finished off by Shawls.
After demolishing the Tigers, Port took on Fremantle in the semi-finals, where they faced their biggest setback of the season. Down 46-15 in the second quarter and with the season hanging in the balance, Robbie Gray's 4-goal third term inspired yet another classic comeback. It's a final that doesn't get talked about much, yet it resulted in one of the games of the year. Ollie Wines bobbed up to hit the scoreboard again with 3 majors. Jared Polak once more staked his claim as the recruit of the year, and the back 6, namely Pittard and Broadbent, stood up when the heat was on. Despite Michael Walters' best efforts to salvage Freo's season, it was a late gut-running Wingard goal to send the South Australians onto their first prelim berth since 2007. Port would play the reigning champions Hawthorn in front of a 75,000 strong MCG crowd, and they were all treated to an absolute thriller. There are only a handful of matches in the past decade that remain seminal in terms of their effect on the league's history, and this was one of them. Should Port Adelaide walk out of Punt Road with a victory, the Hawthorn dynasty is over, and if the Hawks prevail, the Power legacy restricts itself to a mere flash in the pan.
Live action from the MCG.
Final underway, Hawthorn and Port.
This game showcased top shelf quality on both sides of the footy. From the big first quarter collision between Duray and Matt White to an Angus Monfrey's mark running back with the flight, the sheer courage of both teams stood out massively on the big stage. And for all of Port's efforts, the quality of the home side's response in the third term was unflappable. Roughhead produced arguably the finest match of his career with a 6-goal bag, Will Langford 29 possessions and a gritty one-on-one battle with Boak, who accumulated 33 of his own. And with the Hawks holding on to a 5-goal lead at the start of the final term, the Power were on the ropes, and it looked as if their season was ready to die. And in spite of all the last quarter comebacks, all the magical late moments they'd conjured up thus far, and all the hurdles they'd overcome, nobody thought Port could pull off one last upset. But they gave it a red-hot crack.
Huge kick. Goes the left banana and he goes. Pollock from 55 metres. It's right there. It's there. I think it's a goal. Thought of stopped. Port are back within 4 points. They're back within one straight kick.
The champions had utterly capitulated in the space of 5 minutes and were one miscue away from blowing their stranglehold on the competition. But with the Power running out of time, their late charge quickly turned to haste.
Mark Ebert, he doesn't waste any time. Brilliant smother Hodge. Oh, look at Jonas go in. What a bounce. It'll be a big kick. Here comes Monfries. Monfries and Lake. Lake and Monfries. 25 seconds to go. 5 seconds. 2 seconds.
I thought he was going to play holding the ball.
Hawthorn have made the grand final. Hawthorn have won.
Legendary NBA coach Pat Riley once said of the playoffs that there are only 2 outcomes: winning and misery. And looking at the post-game scenes of this unbelievable match, the emotions of each side aren't as black and white as you'd think. Hawthorn aren't even celebrating. They're in a state of utter relief and exhaustion. They got away with one and they all knew it. Port, on the other hand, were broken. Their comeback story didn't get its happy ending. And unfortunately, they changed for the worse after that final. They missed the finals back-to-back and fell victim to Luke Shuey's clutch antics in week 1 of the 2017 finals, never quite recapturing the form of their younger sides from years past. Although a lot of the key pieces were still intact, mostly regarding the personnel, the fairy tale aura that once surrounded them had long gone. With that being said, 2019 was certainly a step in the right direction performance-wise. Blooding the young talent of Rosie, Dersma, Butters and Drew will provide longevity and quality to a lineup of a club that just needs to balance their on-paper talent with some consistency to mount another legitimate September challenge. As the 2010s have had its Cinderella team and the 2016 Bulldogs, it can be easy to overlook the depths of despair that Port crept out of to provide some entertaining footy in the middle of the decade. But the history books will forget them due to their lack of silverware. Having said that, it's still important to reflect on the teams that everyone rooted for. Their time near the top was short-lived, but that Port team came within a kick of restructuring the entire AFL. We'll just never know what it could have looked like.